my analysis of the aspirants' entries that you have all filled in the Google form, I could understand that economics happens to be one among your weaker subjects. So in addition to environment and science, many of you have also expressed your inability to score high when it comes to economy related questions in your examination. So I thought I'll share some of my approach towards economy, which was an approach which I had personally followed. So that's an approach which does not rely on textbooks. It's because I feel no matter what you read out of NCRTs, no matter whatever terminologies you get clarified out of, let's say, a Vivek Singh book or a Ramesh Singh or Shankar Ganesh, and these are commonly the textbooks that aspirants use for preparing for economy. So no matter what you prepare from all these textbooks, I think it can only take you up to a certain extent. So it requires a lot of self preparation to be abreast of the different ideas and concepts which are just so abundant in the discipline of economics. And no matter what textbook you read on a standalone basis, since you do not really understand when you read the textbooks about how is it related to current affairs, how is it related to a daily aspect of your life, you may not be able to really utilize the maximum out of the reading of your textbooks. So that is why, and I was able to soon figure it out during my course of preparation. So beyond the basic extent, maybe 10 or 20% of the credit I should be giving to the static textbooks, because they just help you understand what is inflation, what are the different terms associated with expenditure, let's say what is primary deficit, trade deficit. So such kind of terminologies to give you some sense about them. It is only to that extent I think all these textbooks are useful. So I would say that my entire learning happened from economic survey. Mostly aspirants tend to read economic survey hoping that I'm going to give my exam only in the next year. So when the next year's economic survey is released, maybe at that point of time I'll start reading it. Okay, that's not your right outlook towards economic survey. Okay, economic survey, it's basically an assessment, it's a diagnosis of how healthy the economy has been in the last 1 year, right? So the government commissions a study and they go and dig deep and probe into all the different sectors of the economy, trying to find out what worked, what did not work, so that if at all any course correction has to be undertaken, what kind of measures can be taken in the upcoming year. So it's basically a very, very good diagnosis, just like how a doctor diagnoses the health of a patient. So that's the same manner in which government attempts to survey and to study the state of economy, right? So I would say that this is a document that each one of you must be finished with before November or December itself, not once but 2 or 3 times of reading at least, and all 3 readings are not the same. There is a good difference between all the 3 stages of reading when you read economic survey. So it's only when you are ready with understanding and having made sense of all areas that are discussed in economic survey, it's only then you feel the confidence that you would have learned how to analyze trends, you would have learned how to utilize charts and the concepts given in the different boxes. And when you look at the index or the lists, right, you will come across a lot of abbreviations of different government schemes and a lot of abbreviations of various economic theories and concepts. All of that are just they are just pretty much in abundance in economic survey, right? So it's only when you have gone through all of that at least 2 or 3 times before your November or December this year, only then when the next year's economic survey is launched, it's released, you will be able to finish the next year's economic survey within 2 or 3 weeks. If you hope to master the next year's economic survey, if that's going to be your first level of reading of economic survey, I'm very sure that's going to be totally useless. Okay, you'll read 1 or 2 chapters, you will feel it's too hectic and too difficult, and slowly you will give up on economic survey. And let me tell you, this economic survey, one document is sufficient to complete your entire preparation of economics. So with that in mind, first let's try to understand why should we prepare from economic survey, what is its utility in the first place. You need to understand that the role of economy in mains is not to be equated with the role of polity. Not all subjects are equal in mains. Okay, polity, for example, occupies 50% of your GS paper 2. So 125 marks in general studies paper 2 is simply from polity, but economics is just 4 questions every year, not more than that. When you exclude agriculture, when you exclude food processing industries, right, when you can exclude that, just 4 questions is the overall relevance of economy, core economics. Okay, so I would say its utility is after all for 50 marks in mains. But when it comes to prelims, economy has almost equal relevance as that of polity. Okay, every year at least 15 questions are asked from economy in prelims. Okay, and let's say I divide the total questions asked in prelims into two categories. The first category being the easy and the moderate ones, and the next category being the difficult ones. I would say 50% of the questions are difficult in nature, 50% of the questions are easy and moderate in nature. To handle all the easy questions, I would say your classes plus whatever you have read from your NCERT is more than sufficient. To handle the moderate type of questions, if you have been regularly following the newspaper, right, whenever there is something happening in your economy, let's say some allegations of Hindenburg on the SEBI chairman, right, as a result of which, if you can just simply understand what is SEBI, what are its different functions, and if you have just done some extra browsing about that, you are very good to go with respect to handling 50% of your economic questions in your prelims. Right, 50% of your questions in prelims can be handled simply from your NCERT alone and a regular follow-up with Hindu newspaper. But handling the other 50% questions, right, that is where you need to actually have a very good grasp of different aspects of economy. You need to have a good grasp of the trends of macroeconomy, right. So for the last decade, each different parameter, how has been the trends? Has the primary deficit been on increase or has it coming down, right? And what has been the gross capital formation in private sector compared to the public sector, right? It's a keen observation of all these trends, good knowledge of all these terms and their concepts, which is what helps you tackle the remaining 50% of the questions. And that's why I would say economic survey is very, very useful, because it's only through economic survey and attempting tests out of economic survey, right? Even if you do not attempt tests as of now, it's still fine, but completing your 2024 economic survey is very, very essential before the month of November or December, so that once your prelims test series starts after the month of December, you feel equipped enough, you feel confident enough, and so that's only factor which prevents you from dropping out of your test series. Otherwise, what happens is you go and give your test, you're not able to see any significant improvement in your score. It's always 20-30 marks out of 100 or 200. So that keeps pulling you down, and after all, after some time you get demotivated and you stop giving tests, right? A negative cycle starts from there onwards. So that's why, to avoid falling into this trap, I would say the best course of action is to simply finish off this economic survey in the next couple of months, and let me teach you how you can actually do that. You have here on the screen is my approach, which I have written it in the form of 4 different points here. So let's discuss each point one by one. So first is all about reading and completion of economic survey, and that is to be done in the form of 3 different stages. The first stage is the green stage, right? So in this stage, what you do is simply open your economic survey. Let's say you go to a particular chapter of economic survey. If let's say this is the preface, right, this is like the first introductory remark upon this entire document. So this is like a broad overview of what is to come in the upcoming pages. So let's say I start reading preface, I come to the second page, and in the second page there is a good amount of information available on the state of employment in India, right? How has been the growth of employment in different sectors in the last 1 year. That is what you find in this preface. It's just an introduction, it's not discussed in detail. So we have different chapters to discuss in detail about it. But let's say I open this particular preface, right, and you should be actually reading from preface. You should not simply say that, oh, that preface is useless, so let me go to the first chapter and let me start reading it. That's not the way to read. So you start from preface. So when I start reading it, let's say I come across 2.5 pages of content regarding an state of employment in India. Now what do I do with that? First, I just generally read this, okay, all these green highlighted parts, right? So this is what actually falls on my eye when I first read it. Okay, though I have highlighted here, actually I don't use any highlighters. I don't actually take highlighter and highlight all these things. It's more like a mental process. It's more like I just read between the lines. I try to understand what is actually the larger idea that is conveyed in this 2.5 pages. My priority is simply to condense this 2.5 pages of content into just some 3 or 5 or 4 or 5 points. I just need some 5 takeaways from all of this, so as to build some kind of a coherent narrative in my mind, right? So that's, after all, my goal in reading this 2.5 pages. So what do I do when I read it? I just observe what is actually written here. I don't look into the numbers, I don't look into the data or the figures, nothing. I just tend to understand that, oh, there has been a surge in agricultural employment because a lot of people have reverse migrated to rural areas. And then there's another statement which says that the total number of factory jobs grew annually. Oh, fine. It seems that employment is good. A lot of people are getting jobs, right? So I move on, right? Then there is a lot of data and facts and all of that, which is not going to be my substance of my first reading. Okay, but even though I'm just skipping it now, but actually you have to go through it once. It's only when you go through it you get to understand, oh, there are just so many numbers. Let me not focus it as of now. Let me just go to the next paragraph. So you make your mind that you're not going to spend any more time on the first 1 or 2 paragraphs. Now you just go to the next textual areas. You see there are no numbers here. So let's try to understand what's written here. So here it talks about India suffered 2 big economic shocks. So one is the COVID pandemic. The other one is bad loans in our Indian banking system, right? So this attracts me now. Now I feel that I can actually use this idea somewhere in my answers as a part of my introduction, right? So let's say if any particular question is asked about what reforms has the government taken recently to improve the health of banking, probably I can actually bring this as an introductory idea in my answer, right? So it is this sense, it is this maturity, and it's this foresight with which you actually approach this content, thinking that it can be somewhere useful for you, right? So I tend to read it even with more consciousness. Okay, so I read it. Now I feel after reading that, okay, it seems to be a good introduction material. So immediately towards the left, on the left margin, I just make a simple marking that it's a good intro point, just intro. Okay, I hope you can see it on marked in blue, right? And then I just move on to the next paragraph. So next paragraph talks about it's like a prophecy. It's like what is going to happen in the upcoming years. It's like a utopian prediction that the future is going to be so good for India, right? So I tend to just read that because there are no numbers, it's just simple texts. So I tend to understand that India is nicely positioned, just like how China was positioned when China opened up to the world. So we are on the threshold of just exploding into a great development. So this is the idea that I get to understand from this second paragraph. So there are no numbers, there are no figures, nothing to note here. I'll just keep moving on. Okay, so the next paragraph, again there are no numbers, nothing. So I tend to read it. Here I get to understand that it is worth reiterating that job creation happens mainly in the private sector. Oh, I get to understand that it's a private sector which seems to be providing the most number of jobs. Okay, then I move on to the next paragraph. In terms of financial performance, corporate sector has never had it so good. It means the corporate sector has been performing very well. Okay, so everything seems to be positive. All right, that's good. So results of sample of over 33,000 companies show that in 3 years, the profit before taxes of Indian corporate sector nearly quadrupled. So it means that for a lot of companies, the profit has actually quadrupled. It has become 4 times in the last 3 years. Okay, so it means a lot of growth has been happening in private sector. Fine. Then there are just so many numbers, I just skip it. Okay, I just move on, and here there is a negative remark. Hiring and compensation growth hardly kept up with it, but it is in the interest of companies to step up hiring and worker compensation. So what I get to understand is that even though corporate profits have all become so good, but when it comes to creation of new jobs, it doesn't seem to have happened. Okay, it might have happened, but not at the same pace at which the profits have quadrupled. So it means that even though profits have gone by 4 times, the employment creation would not have gone by 4 times, right? So it means that the profits are not getting distributed to a larger section of people. Probably the profits are simply going into the pockets of the corporate owner, right? So that is what it indicates. But fine, I get an idea that the economy is doing good. Until now, let me summarize my ideas. 1, there is a growth in employment in agriculture as well as in industrial sector. Second, there has been a great problem in the past in the form of COVID pandemic, in the form of bad loans, but India has somehow managed it very well, and the future looks very promising for India. And even when you look at the present, the corporate profits gives us a very, very positive picture that things are working very, very well for India. So these are some of the ideas that I tend to get from this particular document. From this basic reading of the first 2 pages, what have I gathered now? I have understood that the employment scenario is very, very positive. In terms of employment, both agricultural sector and manufacturing sector seems to have created more jobs. And even though we had some economic shocks in the form of bad loans as well as the COVID pandemic, we seem to have bounced back very resilient out of all of that. And the corporate performance in the last few years has also been very good. The profits have become 4 times in the last 3 years, correct? So all of these are some macro ideas that I have picked up. As you can see, I am not focusing on any of the factual data, any of the trends, nothing in the which is given in this paragraph, right? My entire focus is only to get the big picture of things. This is how I do my first reading. So as I go on and on, whatever I do not understand, right? So let's say there is a term says profit to GDP ratio. If I don't understand, I immediately write it on the right margins. Okay, and here then there's something else which says the nominal GDP grew by 9.6%. So nominal GDP, let's say I have to refresh my memory once again on what nominal GDP is. I write it on the right margin of this paper, right? So similarly, when I just do the same process, this is my first level of reading, correct? So I just read it wherever. I don't focus on the data, I don't focus on the facts and figures. I just keep on proceeding like that. I end up finishing an entire chapter. So now what next after I finish a chapter? So after I finish a chapter, I'm just simply going to summarize, nothing else. Okay, so I'll just take a new notebook for economic survey. So let's say I have read an entire chapter. This preface goes for 20 or 30 pages. If I have read for 30 pages, I'll make sure, without having a look at this, look at whatever I have read. Maybe I'll read it once. I'll try to revise what I have read in the last half an hour or 1 hour of my time. After that, I just take a notebook without having a look at the economic survey. I just try to remember, recollect whatever strikes me. I just write it in the form of a summary, right? So this is like consolidating whatever you have read in the last half an hour or 1 hour. If you fail to consolidate it, if you fail to package it in the form of a written content, right? It could be either through digital notes or it could be through manual notes, whatever it is. The time that you spend reading, if you want it to last for a longer period of time, if you want to make sure the time doesn't go waste, if that is the case, you have to necessarily summarize. The summary could even be 10% of the total length of the entire chapter, but some amount of summary definitely must be written. And as you can understand, this summary doesn't have any data, it doesn't have any figure, it doesn't have any diagrams or charts or boxes or nothing, right? It's just plain text. It's just your attempt to recollect what you have read in the last couple of hours, right? So this is like the first stage of reading, correct? Now let's move on to the next stage of reading, which I would call it as the yellow stage, right? So let's say I have completed this entire textbook of economic survey. It's after that, now I start reading it for the second time. So when I start reading it for the second time, now I know that I already have an idea about what's there in which places. I know this preface talks about the status of employment, but what I don't know right now is all these data, right? So my second reading is simply going to be where I start observing all these data. Whatever I have highlighted in yellow, this is what strikes me in my second attempt of reading, right? So here I notice all the data which substantiates, instead of simply saying that the employment in both agricultural and manufacturing sector has grown. Now I get to know about in what terms has it grown. Okay, has it been like 50% rise or has it been like 3% or 4% rise? So it's just to simply substantiate what I already know in the form of with solid facts and data. That is what is going to be my objective of the second reading, right? First reading is simply to understand the broad theme. Second reading is to help me understand with proof what I have read is actually right, correct? So this is going to be the objective of the second reading. So whatever you have failed to notice in your first reading, so let's say in your first reading, when you have read this, you did not notice this particular concept called as gross fixed capital formation, right? So if it's here, so let's say you have not noticed this when you read the first time, but now when you read the second attempt, definitely you will come to notice it here. Gross fixed capital formation is 52% in current prices. So this is also one other layer of learning. Okay, so learning has to happen in layer after layer. First is a simple learning, which is simply about what is a manufacturing sector, which is the green stage. The second stage, yellow stage, is data along with some technical terms, like for example gross fixed capital formation. If you haven't had any idea about it, now is the time to go and browse or look at your textbooks. Now go and read it. So what are you ensuring? How is this different from your earlier reading? without this approach, if you were to read, you will simply take a Ramesh Singh book, you will have half a page content on gross fixed capital formation. So you simply just read it mindlessly. Okay, there isn't full involvement into the process of reading. But now if you have got exposed to this particular content in economic survey, now you know in what context is this particular terminology even used, right? Now you get to understand the fixed capital formation is in private sector is not on par with the public sector, right? For public sector, for government, it's 64%, whereas for private sector, it's after all just 52%. So it's not close, right? It's almost there, but the private sector fixed capital formation is actually lesser, right? So now your mind is stimulated. Why is this the case? What is preventing private sector from investing more in development of fixed capital assets, right? Now you start thinking. So it is this thought triggering which will actually happen because of economic survey, right? You tend to read all the concepts and terms in the right context, which is something that you actually miss when you simply sit as a passive audience in the class, right? Because when you would have sat in your classes, what happens is the faculty keeps on clarifying one concept over the other without linking the concept to a particular current context. But when you read economic survey, you get a context in which a particular terminology is located, right? Now when you go and read about the terminology, things make a lot of sense. You tend to retain ideas for a longer period of time. You learn how to make use of these terminologies somewhere when you write your mains answers, correct? It's all of that which happens when you start doing this process, right? So that's why in the second stage of reading, in the yellow stage of reading, now what you are supposed to be doing is to build supporting facts, build supporting data, okay, which can help you augment what you have learned in your first green stage. So first green broad level of learning, it's going to be supplemented with data collection, factual augmentation of this yellow stage. So in fact, I would say that just these two stages are sufficient to crack both prelims and mains. Okay, you do not even have to go to the next stage, right? The next stage is blue stage, where what you're going to learn out of that has a very marginal utility, and that utility is also limited to your personality test, I would say. Okay, it's because in the blue stage what you understand is these data, they don't reveal the entire picture. The data hides more than what it says. Okay, I'll give you an example for that. Blue stage is where, though the data says that in private sector gross fixed capital formation has been pretty good, it's about 52%. Okay, so it says that, but there is some problem associated with that. What is the problem? Look at this. In private sector, the gross fixed capital formation in dwellings and other buildings and structures has increased by 105%. So the corporates, Ambani, Adani, they are simply building buildings after buildings. Okay, but whereas in the private sector, the gross fixed capital formation, machinery and equipment and intellectual property products has cumulatively grown only by 35%. So when you take an average of that, then it becomes 52%. So you see, when we read in the second stage that the gross fixed capital formation is 52%, right, we tend to take it happily. Oh wow, it's good. But when you probe more into the data, when you get to understand, when you break it down, and when you now examine, you find that it's actually not a healthy trend. They're simply buying real estate, or they're simply buying buildings. Okay, but they are not investing in technology. They are not investing in machinery and equipment, which is going to actually generate more outcomes. Correct? So the buildings that they buy may not be actually directly related to this business that they are operating, but the machinery that they are buying is it's directly related to the business, right? So this is an unhealthy trend. This is what we get to understand when we further probe this data that is given in the economic survey, right? So this is like the third level of reading, and this has very less utility in your mains because you do not have the scope. The questions do not give you the space to bring in all these wonderful ideas in your mains examination. So from my experience, I would say just this green stage and yellow stage is sufficient enough to have sufficient amount of data to handle and even excel in mains. It's only if you're really interested to master economic survey, then I would suggest you to go to this third level of reading and to start noting all these aspects, right? Or if you feel that maybe during your personality test time, selectively maybe you can read it again, and maybe you can brush up all this data. You can get to understand about all these aspects so as to have a nice conversation with the members in the personality test board, right? So it's only when you have an eye on personality test, and if you really plan to excel and impress and to have and to prove to them that you are much better than all other competitors who they have interviewed, it's only for such people I would actually recommend this blue stage of reading. And for the larger audience, I think just the first 2 stages are more than sufficient. All right. So now let's have a look at what other points do I have in my mind. So once you're done reading this economic survey in this manner, maybe read 2 times, okay, the green stage as well as the yellow stage, right? Read it. Try to finish this entire economic survey in this fashion before November or December. So once you are done with that, now you can start observing all these boxes and charts. And even these boxes and charts are also to be handled with a lot of ease. Don't try to mug up. Don't try to just immediately mindlessly draw this chart and note it down in your answers. This is not how you actually read economic survey. The purpose of all these charts is basically to help you appreciate where India stands with respect to other countries. How has been our performance in a particular sector in the last few decades? You just need to know whether we are going up or whether we are coming down. Have we fared better or are we worse than other countries? Right? It's just for the simple appreciation you should make use of these charts. Don't make an attempt to immediately note down these charts. Okay, in the very first 2 readings, I would say that you do not even have to note down any of these charts and boxes. Okay, these charts and boxes are simply to give you a sense of what is there in it. Let's say you read this particular chart which is there before your screen right now, right? Let's say this chart talks about the fiscal deficit has actually edged up across countries. When you see this chart, you're able to understand the fiscal deficit of India has not shot up compared to various other countries. So India, we have actually managed a fiscal deficit pretty well, right? And this is an opportunity for you to learn what is fiscal deficit, right? So there is a constant revision. There are repetitive cycles of revision which you actually undergo when you come across all these charts, when you come across all these boxes. Okay, so fiscal deficit would have definitely come somewhere else when you have read this economic survey. In addition to that, when you have read these charts, when you go through these charts, this is once again an opportunity for you to brush up your basics. It's through this multiple revisions you become very strong with all different aspects of this particular term, right? So this is going to be the second step that you're going to do. Okay, so first step, finish 2 readings of economic survey before November. Okay, and while you do that, when you observe charts and boxes, don't make an attempt to memorize, but just endeavor to learn something out of these charts and boxes. Okay, this is not for you to immediately make a note of it, thinking that your work is actually note making. No, your work is first understanding. Note making is simply to utilize this understanding, right? So that's the third phase. The third phase is utilizing the boxes and charts, right? So this is to be done after taking tests, after you have written a mains tests. Okay, either now or even after you clear your prelims. Let's say you clear prelims next year, and after that, in the 3 months gap between prelims and mains, you start writing mains tests. You attempt mains test series, right? At that time, when you face questions that are relevant to all these ideas that are there in economic survey. Now, after writing a test, let's say the evaluator has given a feedback. The feedback given is that why don't you use more data? Why don't you enrich the content with data? In that time, you need data. Right, so then you can actually come back to economic survey where it's like a grand collection of all data of all different sectors, easy to pick and choose. So just pick and choose only selective areas which you feel you were not able to recollect on the day of your test, right? So this is the phase in which you have to go one after the other. All right, and last step is, this is a step that you have to do before your prelims, but after this December, right? This is what I call as a random recollection process. Right? What do? You basically open your economic survey out of nowhere. Simply take an economic survey whenever you're bored after January or December onwards. Whenever you're bored, just open this economic survey. You go to this lists, okay, abbreviations, right? You have all the abbreviations here. So let's say you come to understand, you come to know something called as Asian Development Bank. Immediately try to recollect what is Asian Development Bank, right? Ayushman Bharat Health Account. So now try to remember what is Ayushman Bharat Health Mission, correct? So this entire list that you find here, the index that you find here, it is basically going to be a mechanism for you to start remembering, start recollecting. And here is where you will find the abbreviations of all important government schemes. You will have abbreviations of all different economic terminologies, right? Somewhere you will find GDP, somewhere you will find GFCF. Okay, what is all these? right? You can immediately start revising, you can immediately start recollecting. So this is also another important part of economic survey, which I felt was very, very useful to help me sail through prelims. Okay, not everything can be found in your textbooks, actually speaking. So come out of your textbooks, don't be totally dependent on your textbooks all alone, right? It is from these parts of economic survey you will be able to remember and recollect on the day of your prelims examination. All right, so to summarize it, your next couple of months, your targets are: first, make a plan as to how much hours are you going to spend on a daily basis trying to prepare from economic survey. Okay, so let's say you spend 1 or 2 hours a day. Okay, even if you spend 1 or 2 hours, I'm sure you'll be able to finish half a chapter of this economic survey, the way I have told you, simply going through the macro themes, simply going through the broader ideas without struggling to memorize anything, just like reading a novel, right? Just 1 or 2 hours a day, you'll be able to finish 2 chapters in 2-3 days. So I would say that within 1 month, if you spend 1 or 2 hours every day, you will be completed with this economic survey. Your first reading is over, your first summary writing process is also over, right? If you, after that, if you want to take a break, you take a break, or otherwise you continue with your economic survey. Now go for the second reading. When you go for the second reading, now you start thinking, am I able to recollect what I read 1 month back, right? And if you are able to recollect, you feel very happy, you feel confident. Yes, I'm able to actually recollect things. But just that, instead of simply recollecting it alone, now you start value adding to what you have already studied. You start adding supporting data, facts and figures. This will actually consume another 1 more month of your time, right? So start consolidating what you have read with all factual data. Fine, your work is actually finished. You don't have to do anything else beyond this, right? And by the time you're done with all this, it will be December or January, from when you can start doing this active recollection process. Okay, open a random page, now start trying to recollect what have you read out of this. This is definitely a very powerful tool which can actually help you retain and understand and revise what has been forgotten, right? We all have this memory curve. After a point of time, the old memory actually starts disappearing from our minds, right? So it's time to once again put it back, right? So that is what this process can actually serve. And if after all this is over, just with these 3 steps, I'm very sure you'll be able to find significant improvements in your mark in your economy test series in the next year. All right, so go give your prelims. Once prelims is cracked, in the gap between your prelims and mains is when you start making a note of all these charts, boxes, data sets, figures, trends, all of that. Now you start consolidating by giving your test series. Okay, so I hope this video was of use to all of you in how you can prepare economic survey. Thank you.